question 18 of Prima Secunda of the Summa Theologia, we're getting into the specific acts and whether they have goodness or evil in general. And I will warn you, this question has 11 articles, and I am trying very quickly to get through it as quickly as possible while giving you the gist of what this is about. And you're also going to find out that in this article, we're going to be using a lot of terminology, things like end and object and species and circumstances, and all these play into whether an act is good or bad. And as we go along, we'll explain this as best as I possibly can. But let's go on to article number 1. It says whether every human action is good or are there evil actions. And he says we must speak of good and evil in actions as good and evil in things, because such as everything is, such as the act that it produces. Now in things, each one has so much good as it has being, since good and being are convertible. Now what he's going to say here is that just like something that's evil is lacking being, lacking goodness, so also with actions, because some actions lack being, they don't have the fullness of being, and so they lack the goodness. All right, so there you go. Article number 2 says whether the good or evil of man's action is derived from its object. Now, the best way to describe object, I had to look this up to make sure, is it's the thing that's directly willed. You know, it's just the action itself. What is the action? That's the object. So if you put money into the basket at church, the object would be giving money to the church. Okay, that's in and of itself, that's a good action, right? So keep that in mind. And he says the first thing that belongs to the fullness of being seems to be that which gives a thing its species. Now, there's going to be a connection between species and object, which we'll see. And just as a natural thing has its species from its form, so an action has its species from its object, as movement from term. So the primary evil in moral actions is that which is from the object. For instance, to take what belongs to another, and this action is said to be evil in its genus. All right, so to take something from somebody is evil in its genus, but of course you're not looking yet at circumstances or the reason why you did it. I mean, if somebody took something from you and all you're doing is taking it back because you own it, well, that circumstance would mitigate the evil of an action. And so Thomas is going to get into a lot of this as we go along. And of course, we're just giving this a very cursory review now for the sake of time, whether a man's action is good or evil from a circumstance. And he says, yes, we have to pay attention to circumstances. We've already gone over that previously in the Summa, because like I just said in the example, the circumstance is going to matter. Like if you kill somebody, it may be evil if it's an innocent person, but if it's in an act of war and against an aggressor, well, that circumstance changes everything as far as the evil or the goodness of an act. Article 4 says whether human action is good or evil from its end. Now, an end is the purpose or the meaning, or why did you do it? Okay, what's the reason? And he says, just as the being of a thing depends on its agent and the form, so the goodness of a thing depends on its end. All right, so this is very important. Why are you doing what you're doing? And so he says, accordingly, a fourfold goodness may be considered in the human action. First, which is an action is derived from its genus, because as such, as much as it has an action and being, so much it has goodness. Okay, so this would have to do with genus, species, object. Secondly, it has goodness according to its species. Okay, so this is bringing it down one level, which is derived from the suitable object. Okay, that's what we talked about a moment ago. The object is what is the action. Okay, so genus would be higher, perhaps a higher category of things that you're doing. And then thirdly, it has goodness from its circumstances in respect, as it were, of its accidents. Fourthly, it has goodness from its end, and that has to do with what is the purpose or the why of the reason why you did something. Article 5, whether a human action is good or evil in its species. Now, he's already related species to object, and so he's going to say every action derives its species from its object, as stated above. Hence, it follows that a difference of object causes a difference of species in actions, because nothing accidental constitutes a species, but only that which is essential. And a difference of object may be essential in reference to one active principle and accidental in reference to another. Now he says, in human actions, good and evil are predicated in reference to the reason, because as Dionysius says, the good of man is to be in accordance with reason. And so now we're starting to see, how do we tell if an action is good or bad? Well, is it in accord with reason? Evil is against reason. And okay, for that is good for a thing which suits it in regard to its form, and evil that which is against the order of its form. It is therefore evident that the difference of good and evil considered in reference to an object is an essential difference in relation to reason. Okay, so this is really how we tell ultimately the good or evil of an action. There's a lot of different things that come into it, like the purpose, the meaning, the why, the object, the circumstances, right? That's why I think he's spending so many articles here explaining this, is because it's not easy to tell whether an action is good or evil until you know a lot of information about it. Number 6, whether an action has the species of good or evil from its end. Okay, so is the why or the purpose going to impact the species? And he says certain actions are called human inasmuch as they are voluntary. Now, in voluntary action, there is a twofold action: the interior action of the will and the external action. And each of these actions has its object, right? Now, that which is on the part of the will is formal in regard to that which is on the part of the external action, because the will uses the limbs to act as instruments. All right, so ultimately, he's saying that, yes, the reason why you do something, the why, is going to matter a lot. In fact, that is going to give it its formal aspect, because you could do something that looks good. You help an old lady across the street, or you mow her yard, but really all you want is, her money, or for her to put you in her will or something, and therefore that action becomes evil, even though it's from a species standpoint or an object standpoint, it's good. It's a good action. It becomes evil once the end is considered. All right, whether the species derived from the end is contained under the species derived from the object as under the genus, or conversely. So they're saying which one is more important. And what he's going to say here, I'll summarize, is that the species derived from the end is more universal. It's more important, as I just mentioned with that example of helping the older lady. So that is going to be broader than the object, which is a more specific thing. It's what you're doing, but it doesn't take into consideration why you are doing it. Number 8, whether any action is indifferent in its species. Does every single action play into goodness or evil, or are some indifferent to that? He says it may happen that the object of an action does not include something pertaining to the order of reason. For instance, to pick up a straw from the ground, to walk in the field, and the like, and such actions are indifferent according to their species. So this lady is out in the field, she's walking around. It may or may not, register as a good or a bad action, right? Whether an individual action can be indifferent. And again, it's a very similar answer, because here he's going to say every human action that proceeds from deliberate reason is to be considered in the individual good or bad. If, however, it does not proceed from a deliberate reason, but from some act of the imagination, a man strokes his beard or moves his hand or foot, such an action, properly speaking, is not moral or human. Okay, so the fact that I'm moving my hands around doesn't really have any bearing on whether it's an evil or a good action. Article 10 says whether a circumstance places a moral action in the species of good or bad. And he says, since nature is determinate to one thing, nor can a process of nature go on to infinity, there must needs be some ultimate form giving a species difference after which no further specific difference is possible. Hence it is that in natural things, that which is accidental to a thing cannot be taken as a difference constituting the species. And so this is interesting. So he says, reason, forbids damage to be done to a holy place. Consequently, to steal from a holy place has an additional repugnance to the order of reason, and thus place, which was first of all considered a circumstance, is considered here as the principal condition of the object, and as itself repugnant to reason. So he's saying that the fact that something is stolen and the place that it was stolen is a circumstance, but the fact that that circumstance happened to be a church, it gave it more in importance. And so I think what he's saying here is that, yeah, some circumstances can play into the species of an action. That's how I'm taking this. Finally, Article 11, whether every circumstance that makes an action better or worse places a moral action in a species of good or bad. So now he's reiterating what we said in the last article, that a circumstance can make an action, better or worse. And so he says here, a circumstance can aggravate or diminish the sin. This applies to other evil or good actions. Consequently, not every circumstance that makes a moral action better or worse changes its species. Some do and some don't. So sometimes the circumstances are not going to make that much of a difference. I hope this helps. That was it, question 18 of the Summa Theologia, 11 articles. We got through it pretty quickly, of the good and evil of human acts in general. Thanks for joining me as we go through the Summa Theologia one question at a time. God bless you.